Hello, this is Professor Miller here once again. Um, I haven't created a video for a while, and this is my latest one. This is for my business ethics course. Now, what's interesting and what's different about this course was not originally intended to be an online course. It was intended to be um, an in-class class. But today is March 25th, 2020, and so for those of you who are alive now and aware of current events, you realize that we are in the midst of a global coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. So in the United States and many countries, all the schools and educational institutions have been closed to in-person classes, and so everything is being conducted online. Since am familiar with online classes, this is not a huge problem for me. But in this case, I want to my particular class that I'm teaching now is, among other things, a writing enriched course, which means the students have to demonstrate that they do indeed have some sort of ability to read and write clear, comprehensive English sentences. So right now, I am going to give my students an assignment of writing an ethical case study on a business ethics case. And since the format that I want to use is very, very specific, I'm giving a detailed lecture here about what I want in this case study. So, I mean, if anyone else in another university wants to use this as a sort of a template for their own case study, that's fine. I have no problem with that. All my stuff is in public, so if you like it, drop me a comment saying you like it or whatever. All right, so anyway, for my class, I will be uploading a lot of much more detailed information about the course and about the study, about the case, what happened, when, where, how, why, and also more specifics about what I'm expecting from you. Basically, once you read the content of what the case is all about, I want you to write up just a 2-page case study. It doesn't have to be 10 pages, just 2 pages, and it can be in paragraph form. It can even parts of it can also be in bullet format. But even if you use bullet points, you need to write in clear, complete sentences, well-constructed sentences with proper spelling and good grammar. I need you to do that to show me that you, in fact, are able to write well. So the case study, let's get on to that. The case study it's about what's called the Air Force brake case. And anyone who's familiar with business ethics history will probably be familiar with that case. It happened in 1967. A company called Ling Temco Vote contracted with the Air Force to create a fighter jet called the A-7D. And they subcontracted with the B.F. Goodrich Company, which generally makes tires, you may know. They also make brakes, and they contracted with Ling Temco Vote to make brakes for this particular fighter jet. Now, what was unusual about it is that B.F. Goodrich submitted an insanely low bid. I think it was like $70,000 for something like 100 brakes, when normally the brakes themselves would probably cost in the hundreds of thousands. Why did they do that? Why did they submit such an absurdly low bid? Because they knew if they could get their foot in the door, if they could get the contract, then the Air Force would be committed to using them for future brakes, and they could charge a lot more and make a lot of money. So this was an effort to get in the door. What made the deal especially sweet for the Air Force was they promised that the brakes would only have 4 rotors, 4 pads to slow the plane down, and it would be very light. And the fact that the brake was small and light would be beneficial because it would give the plane a greater space for cargo or whatever they wanted to put in, rockets, bombs, whatever the plane would be carrying. So this contract was accepted by Ling-Temco Vote, and they asked B.F. Goodrich to get right on it, and they promised that they would do it within 1 year. They'd have all these brakes done. A senior engineer at B.F. Goodrich designed the brakes, and then he was asked to get onto a different assignment, and so he left the manufacture of the brakes to a young engineer who's fresh out of graduate school or college. Anyway, just a newbie. And when this newbie started making the brakes, and you can read I'll submit the whole thing. You'll have all the names and places and dates. When the new engineer was constructing the brakes, he found that they were too small. And no matter what kind of padding he used in the brakes, the padding would burn out too quickly. They were supposed to be able to stop 51 times without burning out. They couldn't do it. And he went to his superiors and asked them to reconsider, and they said, no, the senior engineer knows what he's doing. Just trust in him and make the brakes. And then they got a young guy named Kermit Vanderveer, who was not even an engineer. He was just a technician in the lab. And they asked him to help with setting up the various tests that they were running, and also then finally to write up the report showing that the brakes were working properly. And B.F. Goodrich actually reported to the Air Force that, in fact, the brakes were fine. But when he looked at the test results, Kermit Vanderveer realized they're not working, they're defective. And so he went to the other junior engineer, and they went to their bosses and complained, and the people said, just don't worry about it. And he said, but somebody might die. And he said, well, you're worrying about stuff that doesn't concern you. Just write up the report to show that the brakes were working. So then the deadline came. This report had to be submitted. And Kermit Vanderveer was in a bit of a conundrum because he had an ethical dilemma. His job, he is a loyal, employee of B.F. Goodrich, wants to do a good job for his company, wants to do what he's told to do, follow directions, but also to do what he's being asked to do, he would have to lie. He would have to manufacture false results. And he's thinking about the fact that this could have a big impact on the pilots of the planes, for one thing, or for a lot of other people involved with this. And so he was really struggling. But one of the problems was that he had recently bought a new house. He and his wife moved in, and they had mortgage payments. And if he were to not do what he was asked to do, he would lose his job. So the question is then, what should he do? Should he write the report? Should he, go to the government and become a whistleblower? Explain what's happening. What should he do? Should he look for a different job? What should he do? So, anyway, the information that I upload to you will tell you what he did in the short run and in the long run, and it'll give you more details. So in making out this case study, there are 5 steps to it that I want you to consider, and I want you to put into the case study. All right, and it doesn't need, as I said, it's just maybe 2 pages long. It doesn't have to be a lengthy thing, just 2 pages, but I want all of these steps in there. And so let me just show you what steps I'm talking about. So this is a business ethics course, and this is an ethical case study on the Air Force brake case. And this involves, among other people, Kermit Vanderveer, who was asked to write the report, and the B.F. Goodrich Company, and this was the year 1967, and this was in their plant in Troy, Ohio. Now, the first point that you make in your essay or your case study, number 1, what are the facts? Imagine that your reader does not know anything about this. Unless people have studied ethics before, or business ethics, they won't know about this case, most likely, or unless they were very old and they lived in Ohio in 1967. But first of all, give all the essential facts. Who did what? Who was involved? Ling-Temco Vote, the Air Force, B.F. Goodrich. What did they promised to do, and what did they actually do? What did they actually deliver? And what sort of pressures did they put on Kermit Vanderveer? What was he asked to do? Who else was involved? In other words, list all the major facts that someone would need to know to understand what you're talking about if they had never heard of this case before. Okay? So that's point one. Point two is, what are the obligations? Who are the stakeholders? In other words, what obligations did B.F. Goodrich have? What obligations did Kermit Vanderveer have and his fellow co-workers? Who were the stakeholders? In other words, when we say who are the stakeholders, who will benefit or who will be harmed by the various actions that are taken by Goodrich or by Kermit Vanderveer? Who is going to benefit? Who's going to be harmed? And what are the outcomes there? What's going to happen to these people? Thirdly, what moral values should be considered in this situation? In other words, if you are writing a research report, then one of the most important things in scientific research or in any kind of research is factual accuracy and honesty, to tell the truth. So what sort of things are important here? I mean, you can think of things like, I'll just give you a couple examples, like the value of life, the sanctity of life. If these brakes fail, somebody could die. But there are other values too. Loyalty to your company, honesty, integrity, a number of things. But think about the various moral values that you've heard of in your life. You can even look up moral values on Google or something to see what kind of moral values. But list those moral values which are very pertinent to this particular case. Okay? Then fourthly, list the choices and possible outcomes that were open there to Kermit Vanderveer. I don't know if you can read it. It says, for Kermit Vanderveer, what choices did he have and what are the possible outcomes or consequences of his choices? So what I want you to do is list, okay, possible choice number one. He can, for example, just do what he's told, write the report. Even though it's factually inaccurate, just write it as is. If he were to do that, choice one, write the report as instructed, what are the possible outcomes? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to B.F. Goodrich? What's going to happen to the pilots? What's going to happen to the other companies involved? Then number two, he has a second choice. What else could he do other than just write the report? Could he think about it? If you were in that situation, what choices would you have if you're asked to do something to write a fraudulent report to be given to the federal government? What choices do you have? Use your imagination. You're in a business, somebody says, hey, write this report. And you say, well, it's kind of fake. Well, write it anyway. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of the details. What choices do you have? I can think of 2 or 3 or 4 right off the top of my head, things that you possibly could do. List those choices, and then for each choice, underneath, write, what are the possible outcomes of that particular choice? Then finally, point 5, what is your decision? If you were Kermit Vanderveer, what would you do, or what would you have done in his situation, and why? Don't just say, I would have done X, and then leave it at that. I would like to know what you would have done, or what you would do, and why you would do it. What thoughts go through your mind that lead you to the conclusion that you should do what you say you're going to do. All right? This is a very simple, straightforward sort of thing. I realize that this is a very low-tech video, but, as I said, this was not intended to originally be an online course. I could have come up with a few more bells and whistles here, but the main point here, I want to get the primary points across for this particular assignment, which is a case study analysis, an ethical case study analysis. So, again, it's the Air Force brake case involving Kermit Vanderveer, B.F. Goodrich, 1967. Number 1, list the facts. Number 2, the obligations and stakeholders, who's going to be hurt or who's going to benefit, who has some stake in this whole situation. Number 3, what are the moral values that should govern our thinking, our action in this situation. Number 4, what choices would someone have if he were Kermit Vanderveer, and what were the outcomes of those particular choices he could make? And fifthly, what is your decision if you were Kermit Vanderveer? What would you do? So I apologize that this is rather a low-tech sort of thing, but as I said, this was not meant to be an online course originally, and if I were to redo this in the future, I might do it differently, but then again, probably not. I'm a low-tech kind of guy most of the time. I use tech as is appropriate and as it helps people. And sometimes too much tech can just kind of numb your brain. So I like sort of graphic visuals right here, hands-on. I'm that kind of guy. I like hands-on stuff. And I hope that for those of you who are watching this, my students and anyone else who might be interested in business ethics will realize, will appreciate this little video and this assignment. And as I said, if other professors in other schools want to use this sort of format, be my guest. I have no problem. So please go ahead. Thank you very much, and good luck with your assignment, class.